Thank you for joining us. I'm Danielle Knapp, McCosh Curator at the George Schnitzer Museum of Art at the University of Oregon. The university and museum are located on the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, the Kalapuya were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, Kalapuya descendants are primarily citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, and they continue to make important contributions to their communities, to the UO, to Oregon, and to the world. We acknowledge that we occupy their land and extend our respect to all of the Indigenous people from Oregon and those who now call this place their home. The McCosh Memorial Visiting Lecture Series, which honors the legacy of Oregon artists David and Ann McCosh by bringing speakers on the topic of Pacific Northwest art to our community, is made possible by the McCosh Memorial Museum Endowment Fund and an extraordinary advisory committee. My thanks to Craig Cheshire, Andrew Cook, John J. Cruson, Sandra McCosh Leonard, and Roger Sadak for their many years of support and for their recommendation of this year's speaker. Portland-based artist George Johanson likely needs no introduction for many in our audience. At age 92, he's been drawing and painting for over 80 years. Today, he will talk about where his art has taken him and why he feels the need to keep making it. And we look forward to answering some audience questions at the end of his presentation. My thanks to our speaker, George Johanson, to Aaron Johanson, my colleagues at the JSMA and on the McCosh Advisory Committee, our museum members and supporters far and wide, and especially to all of you with us in the audience today. And now, George, please share with us why make art?
Oh, I guess, is that my cue?
That's your cue, sir.
Oh,
Take it away.
all right. Oh, well, thank you very much, Danielle. That was very nice to hear about the Kalapuya and all that. I think that's great. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak to at the University of Oregon. I think I'm very excited about that. So I'll just go on, start the lecture with some slides here, and with the help of my trusty son. Here we are. So this is, I like to begin with the Lasko cave in France, which is one of the most awesome works of art of all time, and one of my absolute favorites. It's reproduced so often that the one might get the idea that it's kind of like a painting that you could walk into a museum and see it flat on the wall. So this slide is quite a good photograph of it. It's from the National Geographic magazine, and it shows really how high and how big these bowls are. You can see the if you notice, here's the figure down at the bottom, a man standing here. The place where the paintings are is way up above head height, and on very rough walls. It's limestone with a lot of nodules in it. So I wanted to talk about how what the artists might have been doing. When they saw the wall, in the first place, they must have been very excited by the whiteness of the walls. But this is also underground, and they would have seen it by just little oil lamps that were handheld. And they, in order to do the work, they would have first had a concept and maybe even a committee to look over the work and talk about what they were going to do. This might have been it might have been just one artist that was in charge of all of this, but it was certainly many artists that worked on it. They had to bring in scaffolding to get up that high, and their art materials They decorated or they made drawings in and paintings in many of the adjacent chambers at Lasko too. So in all, there wound up to be about close to 2,000 images of animals and signs and so on. This would have had the backing of the entire tribe because it would have meant weeks, perhaps even months of work, and it had, therefore you can presume, even though we don't know what the real purpose of it was, that it had great meaning for the tribe to put that kind of effort and resources into doing it. Let's see. Oh, there we go. As we look at as a close-up of one of them, we can see the beautiful kind of tailoring of the lines, thick and thin, like going from the thinness here to thicker to thin, thick, and how they were how much enjoyment they got out of shaping the lines. The other thing that I'd like you to see here is that as I say, the wall was very rough, so that if they just started drawing these lines with charcoal, it wouldn't have much strength to it. And so the way they were achieving these lines of all of these big bulls was to blow paint at it. They would have made paint from grinding up certain minerals to get that rich black, and then putting that in a little stone dish, and with straws pushing like a mouth atomizer, blowing. And you can actually see that here and here and here, the individual puffs that made that formed that line. There's also evidence that they were using stencils, because if you look at that shape, for instance, it has a hard edge, and as if something was held up there while they were blowing the paint in doing their work. So there are a couple of main principles, I think, involved here. And one is that the kind of joy in making that all artists have. The fact that there was nothing there in terms of there was no animal there until they drew these lines, and suddenly, maybe not so suddenly, but eventually there's a huge animal there that is an illusion. But I think that's part of the joy, and I'll talk about that some more. The joy in making. The other aspect of this, which is that the tribe as a whole benefited from it. And if you think of art as having as being a human need, something that we all as human beings need, then I think that feeds into that notion. So let me go on here. The caves were 17,000 years ago, and so as I said in one of my other talks to Mark Andre's class, 17,010 years later, I did this. This is my 10-year-old drawing. That I did as a 10-year-old. And when I find an old drawing like this, I really enjoy reading it. The fact that I've forgotten, when it goes back this far, certainly forgotten doing it, but it's telling me certain things about what I, as a 10-year-old, was interested in, what I was observing. For instance, the horse has a head that's huge in relation to the young lady here. Um, I think he has a very kindly face. He probably enjoys trotting around and taking her with him, and big nostrils to breathing a lot of air in and out. Probably runs fast, and the knees, which are very bony, and you can see that my attention was very much attracted by those, by drawing those knees. They feel like bone to me, looking at it now. Uh, the young lady is kind of stiff here, but you know, it's a 10-year-old. The hands are very small. Probably they're very difficult for kids to draw, and I obviously didn't want to get too involved in them. Um, the wind's blowing, so it's the tail is blowing that way, and the hair is blowing, and the scarf, and the wind is blowing the mane, and he's probably ready to take off again. Uh, and then it looks like sometime later I added another leg, and I with not paying too much attention to the color of the pencil, probably. And then I thought I'd probably color in the hoofs at the same time. But this, you know, as a kid, one of the big incentives, like what I was pointing out, I think with the cave drawings, is that I'm making something out of nothing. There was the paper there. I was probably working from a photograph, but I was also reading the photograph. I was taking what I wanted from the photograph and putting it on paper, and then this magic illusion of a horse and rider appears. Oh yeah. Let me get a sip of water here. This is George Raft, an actor. A lot of you know who that is. In the 30s, he played gangsters a lot, and he played a gangster later in Some Like It Hot, many, many years later. And when I was a kid, I copied a lot of movie star pictures in magazines and newspapers. And there was a certain kind of lighting that was fashionable in those days. It might have had to do with noir movies and the way they were lit. So the lighting is very stark, light and dark. And I got very intrigued by the shapes, the shape of where the plane breaks from the front plane to the side plane. And I didn't know anything about planes at the time, but I was that struck me, and it became something that I saw over and over in the photographs that I was copying, and really stuck with me as a kind of style thing, I think. This is again 10 years old. I was looking in the mirror, and you can see that kind of attention to shaping here. This is very, very flat. There's no modeling in here as there could be. So what I was looking at was the shape again of the break between this side and this side, and really looking at where that shape comes to play. I noticed I wasn't very interested in the shadow on the neck, but I was wearing my little cowboy shirt, and obviously liked that a lot. This was when I was 16. I was, and my sister was about 14, a watercolor. And I put this in because I want to point out again this business of finding shape, so that this you know, it becomes still very apparent that that's what I was looking for here, the difference between this and the shape here, and the light playing here, and not putting very much emphasis on any gradation here, so that there's a kind of abstraction to it, which again I didn't even know is as abstraction when I was a kid, but I was looking at those aspects. The Museum Art School, as it used to be, as it looked when I started, which was right after the war in 1946, I came out of high school and started attending there. It was a time when there were a lot of GIs coming back right after the war, and the student body doubled in size during that year, but it was still only 85 students, and we had about 10 instructors in all. Some very, very good artists were teaching there. Jack McClarty and Mike Russo and Louis Bunce and Lita Kennedy, and I just learned a hell of a lot at that school. This is torn down now, of course. It's where the gift shop that's the museum showing there, and the gift shop part is built where that is now. This is I got very interested in printmaking, and this is one of many lithos I did in art school. This is the Corner Tavern, which is now Higgins, used to be called the Broadway Inn, and that's where we went to drink beer at night after night classes and stuff. One of the tenants that you call it, that I adopted very early was to base my art on what's around me, what I see, and what I experience directly. And so this is an example of that. I was very interested in the composition of, for instance, putting that diagonal here against that kind of rectangle here, and both of these being light, and then having a middle unit which is dark, and then light again behind it. There are a lot of things that you do very early on which seem to carry on. I've used that light dark to build space many times in many of my paintings and drawings. This is also while I was in art school, but these are drawings I made from my two sisters. So all of these are my older sister, and then my younger sister was very much younger, so she was about 5 at the time, and my other sister would have been 17 or so. And then combining them to make this bather scene. Bathers I love painting and drawing the figure, so just the general theme of bathing is something that I've used many times, sometimes with a kind of story, a mythology, or just sometimes just groups of bathers to see what I could get out of each one, which might be different from the last. So here, at the request of Danielle, is a tour of my studio. This is it's not huge. The whole area is about 24 by 36, I think. But it has very good skylights. You can see a corner of this one up here is about 8 by 10 feet. And then there's a skylight above the printing area. This is my printing press, my etching press. And we're looking down toward this is the painting wall down here in my palettes and so on. Over here is a utility room that's for storage and for doing various kinds of work that can be shut off from the general, from the studio. And so I don't have to heat it all the time, but I'm pushing the wrong thing. There we go. So that's looking into the utility room. That's a drawing of Stu Levy that I did from some photographs I took of him. This is some of storage of some of my sculpture that I did very avidly at one period for about 2 years. And then the rest just storing things here, and there's a work table and so on. In this corner is a couple of death masks, but these are life masks because we did them while we were still still in this world. Poor old Louis's gone now, but this is Louis Bunce and myself. I was about 33 at the time, and he was about 55, I think. We had a show based on Dada, and part of it was that it was a big group show of artists that got together to do it, and we all did these death masks of each other, and I wound up with these two, which is I value very much. So I always think of Louis and I are off in the corner talking to each other here. Here's my printmaking, my inking table and my light type table here, which I use a lot to work on redrawing things and in printmaking to register prints from one stage to the other. Looking down toward the painting end, it's a painting I'm working on that is called The Senses Overwhelmed. And there's a kind of still life down here with the things in the still life represent the senses. There's the rose and a book and a horn and glasses and so on. And then these are kind of abstract shapes that are like odd bugs and things that are dominating this area. I don't know. We'll see how it works. Here's my drawing rack for prints. And I have two palette areas. This is the acrylic. I work on both acrylics and oils, sometimes often together in the same painting. But I keep the mediums separate so I don't get confused between the oil tubes and the acrylic. And on the wall back here are some little paintings I did of my granddaughter Sonia when she was about 2 or 3 years old, and a couple of sculptural pieces of mine. There's a color test, which I'm often doing with materials to see if they're light safe, light permanent. There's the painting table over there. And we're looking back toward the racks. I scrape down my palette knives, which have acrylic on them. I let that dry, and then I just scrape it off. And I put this bag here to catch the scrapings because I think I'll use them sometime. In some way, I'll sprinkle them into some acrylic paste or something of that sort. And this is other stuff on my wall. Here's a Courbet, wonderful painting, which I saw in Paris one time. There's the drawing of a 7-year-old from. I was teaching in a settlement house in New York. Well, I lived there, and this is his mother. She doesn't need a nose, I guess, just eyes and lips. There's an acrylic, a ceramic test piece, and Graham Sutherland, has been a great favorite of mine. The back door with pieces of stuff on it. When I get a piece of a print that I cut out, I tack it up here just to have something, because I like the individual pieces. the print might have been had flaws in it. There's a self-portrait sculpture, Louis Bunt's drawing, one of my early paintings. So when I have a mirror up here that I use to it's hanging at an angle, so I can look at my painting, which is I'm being worked on back over here on this wall back here, and I can see it backwards, which is very helpful often in seeing it in a fresh way. So I was looking in the mirror one day and started making a little sketch of myself like this. And then I drew the things to the side, just got carrying on with the paper. And then I got looking at that and deciding that why don't I just continue drawing whatever I see here? So I got another piece of paper and kept going and adding just all this stuff, doing very little editing, but trying to make it clear. And then I added still another piece of paper, and so when I got looking at this drawing, I thought that should make could make an interesting painting, where I've got the opportunity to change color at each area in it. So this is a painting that resulted in that. There was a lot of work, but also just because there's so damn much detail in it. But it was also a lot of fun and I kept shifting colors based mainly on a kind of red orange basis. But then it becomes very much fun to start making this like the legs of this table blue, and putting this blue up here and carrying it on with a blue of my smock hanging there, and then eventually I started working with the shape of light coming in through the doorway, and I got this shape worked out, which reads like light coming in, but it's completely arbitrary shape, actually. It just is needed in order to give some relief to all of the detail. I do a lot of paintings of of Portland. It's in just lots and lots of my paintings, no matter what the subject matter is. And this is one I did several years ago. It's been reproduced a lot, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. There are a couple of horizons in this. So it's manipulated in terms of the seeing and what I'm putting in. The rest of this is all, of course, invented. There's no window like this in my house or studio. But then other elements that I have been working with, like the mountain erupting, and certain fires that became kind of standard things that I would put into paintings. There's a fire being reflected here, and as the still life is very unstill, it's everything's going to fall off, or is in the process of falling off, and there's like a firecracker exploding here, and everything else is in motion, like the cat and the papers blowing here, except the figure is very still. Here's a lithograph, again with the idea of looking out at Portland and with, again, using the idea of two horizons. The bridge is a Vista Bridge, which I live near, but it's a bridge out of my mind rather than a literal rendition of it. And I don't actually have a view like that of the city. That's I see it. I've seen it many times up here, but so that's all invented. I mean, the idea that I can see it from the house. Here's the Courbet, or it's a rendition of that Courbet painting, and then things like there's a fire here and another fire, and some smoke from some kind of fire here, and then the volcano, which you can begin to make out here, and the smoke from it coming up. So the landscape becomes very unsettling in an emotional way, I think. And then this is a big painting, 8 feet, was in the volcano show at the museum, and this is very literal from drawings I made of Portland, and also over here, it's the approach to the Markham Bridge, and the volcano going off, but the volcano is in the wrong direction here. It's as if it's Mount Tabor or something. So it's perhaps Mount Tabor thousands of millions of years ago, and some kind of smoke from the horizon that's very mysterious. It's called the mirrored porch, and there's a mirror here and one here, and the mirror is an interesting thing to use because it makes for a kind of reasonable way to make interesting shapes. The way the arms begin to make a new shape here, and this boy is running past the other side of the mirror, but it also becomes then an odd shape in itself, and even the shadow becomes a shape that can be explained by the mirror, but is then something kind of odd, as are these young ladies who are sunbathing at night. I don't know why they're there, except they're a nice foil for nice thing to do over on that side. Moving on. There's a thing called the Doggy Dash, which happens in Portland every year. Used to until last year, I guess. And I observed that several years in a row, and then started doing a bunch of groups of dogs. And I love the shape of dogs because they're so varied in shape and size and personality. They're very nice characters to use in painting. It's another dog painting, putting dogs together from a bunch of photographs of dogs that I worked from, and not having to do with the Doggy Dash, but just a composition with dogs. This one's flying, I guess, and some of them are kind of strange looking, probably some kind of wolf here, one in a cage over here, one that's pretending to be a turtle. And then I was very impressed by the eclipse, as who wasn't, who saw it. But here's my rendition of that. It's the only really complete painting I did of the eclipse. And again, it's all dogs, but they're kind of surrogates for individual people characters. Not specifically people I know, but I think they all have, I'm aiming at a kind of different personality for each one. One day I was looking at, I was downtown on a rainy day. I think it might have been even the junior parade or something. So some people lined up on a curb looking very forlorn. And I made a couple of photographs, And then I started looking at these photographs and thinking that it was an interesting subject. I wound up making probably about 40 different paintings of people on a curb. It's a series that's waiting for the parade. And what intrigued me about it was that it's sort of like a table and still life. The curb and the fact that they're waiting on the curb gives a certain limitation to the compositional structure. And in this case, and these are all invented figures here. They're not from photographs, as are these. So I did a big variety of sometimes single figure or two figures and sometimes many. The Oregonian at one point had, one day, there's this photograph of people waiting. And boy, did that strike me, because I'd already been working with this subject for quite a while. And so I decided to make a drawing that would represent very specifically the gestures of each figure. So as this was going to be the drawing of the whole group, and each one specific, not generalized. And so this figure, for instance, you'll see in the drawing, and this one is like that, and of course this one, which is a kind of dominant. And then, of course, I did things with the values in it. So the darks are grouped here and here. The two groups. Oops. Not supposed to push that. The two darks are grouped here, and then much of this is left lighter, which it wasn't necessarily in the photograph. And then this became a big painting. This is about 8 feet by 6 feet. And the figures are now extended to the horizon. I mean, these people back here have no chance to see the parade. But so it becomes kind of a mystery why they're here, and they're still limited by the curb. They're not. So I think the sense is that these figures are really pressing forward, pressing even out beyond the surface of the canvas. And then these, so it's as if this is a great bulge of figures. I'm almost always looking for something beyond the description by itself. What can I do with it that suggests something a little strange or different? I've taken the same kind of grouping, but moved this dominant figure from one side to the other, and this fellow moves over to this side, and then I've added some things and changed things. So, and I've put myself in here. This is my painting garb. I'm holding a palette knife or something and pointing over at this side. And you'll have to figure out why. Again, the city has disappeared. It's as if there's a large group of people going on to the horizon here. Excuse me, I'm getting a little hoarse. I'm getting a little hoarse. And then this is basically the same grouping of people, but a very different color scheme. And this is kind of significant for me because this is a color range that I didn't anticipate exactly. I started with a gray ground, kind of gray purple, and then started pushing up pushing this up to white, and these kind of salmony oranges here. But it's really a limited range. There's no bright yellow. They're brightish blues, but they're very small here and there as accents. And the whole color scheme comes out to a kind of bruised purpley sense that does something to me. And it's also something that I found. I think this is an important part of what I do. Is I don't just anticipate, I don't just make a plan and decide on the color scheme and do it. I'm looking for something, I'm waiting for something to happen. And this is a good example of the scheme that comes along almost on its own. I'm putting the color down, but it's finding me in a sense. Another way to do figures, and these are all also embedded. I've got a wall of figures standing down here in the front, in the foreground, and then just an indication of many umbrellas going back. But I was trying to hold the brighter reds down here, mostly to underneath, as if they're kind of burning coals down underneath the umbrellas. The same composition, but very different color. This again was found, though. I mean, I arrived at this by working and playing with it, and sometimes getting colors that were a little too bright and then knocking them back down, and kind of letting it happen, but also working with it. Art is fun, but it's also a lot of hard work. Here's a Hockney etching where he's obviously looked at Muybridge's photographs of animals in motion and got that cat from there. And I've done that from Muybridge as well. This has also been reproduced a lot. The Halley Ford Museum has this painting. This has a debt to Magritte and his man with the apple obscuring his face. There's something really mysterious about obscuring a face that way. But the cat and everything else is in motion here. So that cat's going to pass by and we'll see her face eventually. At least it has that kind of sense to it, I think. And another leaping cat. This is my late wife, Phyllis, who many of you know, and our 7 cats that we had at the time, and portraits of them, along with a portrait of Phyllis. And here's my Buster cat now. He leaps sometimes, but he's taking a rest here with our Egyptian cat replicas. Rain is another subject that I've observed. I'm in. It makes something out of it because I've experienced it. So this is a painting that's done after a lino cut, and you can see that it's influenced by the lino cut. This is mainly abstract, but it was started with the idea of that triangular building down on Burnside, West Burnside, which would be this building here. And then I added other buildings, really, but thinking about Burnside down here. And I worked with all these colors and got all this going, and then added the rain. I had that in mind, but I added the rain after everything else was working satisfactorily. This is also quite a big painting. Rain again. Look at how with an area with a color like that, that very thin, intense blue falls way back in space. And these rain paintings, I think, get a very palpable space, as if you could walk into it and walk through it. Phyllis and I rode for about 25 years down here on the Willamette and had our own boat there. Didn't stop rowing until we were both about 80. I'm going to move a little faster. I think it's getting a little over time here, but here's a kind of montage with that I from some photographs I took, and I was interested in how the oars might divide the space. So here it is. The oars become an abstraction, a way of dividing the surface of the canvas. And the color here is very limited to kind of purpley blue and a yellow orange, with just the whites, with whites coming in only to this area. So kind of simple scheme. And again, very simplified scheme. And again, using the oars to sort of divide the spaces of the canvas. This, and the hand-colored etching of a regatta and a lino cut. You can see that each medium gives something different. There's the big float, which happens not last summer, I guess, but had happened with several years before that, where everybody brings all kinds of exotic inner tubes and stuff. And I began to I'm still working on this theme of people with flotation devices. This is a lino cut painting, another painting, with the idea that these are, I mean, I'm very interested in the kind of shapes it makes it when the figure is combined with something they're carrying. And in this case, what they're carrying is their life-saving devices. And but this also tends to be sort of bug-like, which is whenever I can find something that has a double imagery to it, I get very interested. Did a lot of portrait drawings. These are all over life size. This was a project where there were 80 Oregon artists that came to my studio one at a time, and I made drawings of them, all over life size, as you can tell from comparing it to my head here. And other portraits, which I won't dwell on, but here's Rachel Griffin on Vista Bridge in a painting that owes something to Edvard Munch, I think, who I like very much. I'm combining really the shape of that, the darkness up here, the head, and that one house, which does happen to be there, pinning it right up against the head, and then having this vast darkness down here with no indication of bottom to it. This is a very small painting of Louis Bunce, 16 by 20 So as laughing. And this is a portrait I did quite recently of Kim Osgood, who's a very good painter and a mountain climber. And so there's her climbing rope here, and she's painting. She paints mountains and also birds a lot. So gave her some birds coming down to be in that painting. And what else about this? This Mount Rainier, one of her favorite climbing mountains. This is a rendition of one of her paintings. Doesn't look like her painting, but it's the configuration of the birds and stuff. I'll just go through this quickly. This is a commission for Oregon Department of Transportation, and that's the beginning of the canvas. It's about 8.5 feet by 5 feet. And I took a shot of myself just sitting up here because I think I wanted to see what the red looked like against the other red. But so here's some taping happening over here. That's blue tape. It's not lines. It's you'll see what happens there. So the red ground is exposed when I take the tape off, also over here. And then look at this area down here. And I have I'll watch that there. They're spraying a street arrow, but it's also an arrow that that leads into the painting. So it's a kind of an inside joke in a way. Compositionally, it's leading you into the painting down here. And it's day and night. So the idea that ODOT is working 24 hours, they're pouring cement here, and the day side has the architect of bridges in Portland, and then the Coast Highway and early transportation. It hangs in the ODOT office in Salem. And this is just the penultimate slide. So this is the largest work I've ever done. I think it's 32 feet by 7 feet, and it's a tile mural for Bremerton High School. And I did a lot of research for it. So it has the first graduating class in 1905 or something. The Indian culture over here, the ferry, as it might look when you're boarding it, the shipyards. The high school is called the Knights. This was the first schoolhouse. Mr. and Mrs. Bremer over here. It's a lot of fun to do. And just one little point about it is that I hear that a civics class brings, the teacher brings her students out and they talk about various aspects of this in terms of the history of the area and what it has to do with civics. So that's one use for art, I guess. Although I think it looks kind of handsome just as a big painting by itself. And this is the final slide. This is where art gets really useful. My wife used to wear light-colored little jersey sweaters, and they would often get a spot on from food or from whatever source, and they couldn't get rid of it, couldn't wash it out, and yet she liked the jerseys still, so she'd hand it to me, and I'd paint something over the spot. This didn't necessarily have a lot of spots on it. Maybe it had about 3, but I got inventing butterflies and So, and incidentally, acrylic on cloth like this is very washable. These ones that I painted for her have been through the washing machine, and some of them many times, and still hold up. So it's something I might recommend. So Danielle, that's the last slide I have. Went a little longer than I thought it might.
I think it was perfect timing. Thank you so much for sharing all those images and for bringing us into your art making world and these worlds you invent in your paintings and your prints. And if you are up for some questions, I've got good questions coming in. And one from our friend Tom Kramer is, to what extent is your art dependent on and based on your experience of living in the Northwest most of your life? And do you think it would have been different had you lived in another region, knowing that you spent a few years in London? And
Yeah, well, I think I touched on that quite a bit in talking about how I draw from my direct experience a lot. And since I live here and I love Portland as a town, to as a place to be, and I've used it a lot. If I lived, if I stayed in New York or in London, um, I think it would have some influence, but I tend to think that I would paint like I do at any rate, because what I think what happens over the years is that you gradually find out who you are by doing the art. I mean, because you're making choices all the time. Should this go there? Should I leave this yellow here? Should I overpaint that? Should I introduce another figure? All of that is kind of uh, interior, and it doesn't depend on what's happening out in the street, particularly for me anyway. So I know when I lived in London for a couple of years, I was influenced by what was going on there, but it was in the late 60s, and it was there was a certain style to art, a kind of abstraction and plain big open spaces and so on, which I did adopt in my work for a time. So, so it does have an effect, but I think overall, I'm made up more of what certainly the environment, but more about the work itself and what the feedback is from that.
And let me ask what sort of a follow-up question that someone else had asked, and you might want to expand on this. Has your definition of art changed, or your opinion about art's purpose changed as you've matured and developed as an artist? And if so, how would you define the role of an artist today?
I think that I think I would make a kind of general statement that I think art is, I just feel it's terribly important to us as human beings to have art and to make it both are, and the kind of what happens in the making of it, where you're using your whatever creativity you have uh, all the time. I think that's so important for people, and uh, I guess I've lost the train of the question now. What was the rest? What was that?
Well, I think that starts to get into, you know, how your own thoughts about
Oh,
what
the role of
the
art.
role of an
Well,
artist.
yeah, and of course, a lot of people are. There are a lot of artists who are very interested in current affairs and uh, current thinking about things, and wanting to say something about that. And I respect that tremendously. It's never been my way of doing things. Even like, for instance, during the Vietnam War, when I was just like most people, so distressed by what was happening there. I I referred to it in my artwork, but only obliquely. Uh, I never felt that for me it was right to to be making images that were overt. And so, but as I say, I respect that tremendously, and I enjoy very much lots of solutions that particularly younger artists are bringing to it.
You keep giving me great segues into other questions that people have asked, because
Okay.
you were also asked if you have advice for young or emerging artists, or if you have ideas about how someone can start art making on a budget too, if there are limitations to what's available to them.
On a budget? Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because art can be kind of expensive, and if you're buying a bunch of oil paints and if you're a printmaker and you have to buy a press, but there are ways around it. I mean, for instance, if you're a printmaker, you can join a group that and there are a few around that, and share facilities. You can also make art with very humble um, uh, means too. I mean, and I think of examples of people that have used just charcoal and done wonderful wonderful things over time. I don't think you don't need to necessarily uh, have any kind of means or to do art. Now it can get expensive, sure, if you're getting into say ceramics, which I've done a lot of. It's very useful to have your own kiln, maybe almost necessary. I would hate to have had to use someone else's kiln all the time I was doing ceramic murals. But you kind of work up to that. I didn't start that way. And you find that if some of your paintings start selling and you have some kind of income, or from teaching maybe, or whatever your job is, you can begin to gradually expand your materials, uh, if that's your need. But again, art can be made with just the humblest materials.
And you can save up your acrylic shavings like you showed us in the, in the studio,
Yeah.
and repurpose them and sort of stretch your materials. There were also questions from our audience about if you have a particular process or ritual or habit that kind of prepares you for making art, and how much time you spend in the studio, and are there divisions between the art making part of your day and days when you've set aside, for
Oh,
other things?
well, I'm not very disciplined about that anymore. And there was a time in my life when I was probably, spending 6, 8 hours every day in the studio. I tried to get there every day anyway, but I don't have as much energy as I used to have. And I sometimes look back, even in preparing a talk like this, at images of things I've done years ago, and I think, wow, how did I have enough energy to do all that? And look how big that is, you know. So I've kind of, but I do try to get there, and I have a couple of tricks that I have done over the years to entice myself to the studio. And that one of them is to, if I've done something like a print, let's say a woodcut, and it's ready to be proofed, I don't proof it that night. I'll save it. I won't, even if I have some time to do it, so that I have the incentive to go there the next day and say, oh boy, I get to proof this now and see what happened. And when I proof it, it might turn out that boy, that's terrible. It really needs a hell of a lot more work. It's not always, but it is an enticement. And then when I was doing ceramics, of course, that was somewhat the same thing, where you have a kiln full of tile, and then you got to let it cool for a couple of days before you open it. And that was always just such fun to get there and do that and see whether it all worked for you. So you can, yeah, I think it tricking, I call it tricking myself, but I think that's fair. I mean, I don't blame myself for tricking myself into it.
Can you talk more about the importance of color and why you use such a bright palette, and even the relationship between painting and printmaking, and maybe how your experience or use of color is different between the two?
Yeah, it is. Uh, I got into a technique in etching, which was to treat etching uh, um, like a surface printed print rather than intaglio, where you're wiping. Normally, you're wiping ink into the lines and then wiping it off the surface. But I was designing it and printing it by rolling black ink on the surface and printing it that way because I liked the precision of the white lines. So that was that whole series of prints, and that went on for a number of years, is rather dark in tone. And I got hand coloring the prints, but then I really love color, and I have used strong color when when it seemed appropriate ever since I was in art school. But periods vary. You know, sometimes I'll see a whole period where this is a grayer range. Um, for the last several years, I've been very conscious of pushing the color as much as possible, using brighter color, but it doesn't work just to make it bright. You have to still make the color do something. It has to work. The color is always related to the color that it's next to, which is related to the color that it's next to, which is related to that color which is next to, and you have to go with that. But I I love I love being able to push color as much as possible. I've done some paintings that were, like, for instance, just all cerulean blue with white line in it, nothing but that, or and that were kind of monochromatic, but bright color, intense color that was monochromatic. Uh, the color really comes from the inside for me. I don't have to be in Tahiti looking at or Hawaii looking at bright relationships. I might enjoy that very much, but I pull it out of my head. And then often people say, "Oh, have you been to Hawaii lately," or something when they see it.
Thank you. Should we look at maybe one or two more questions? Let me take a look at what else everyone's been asking, and lots of compliments on the talk and the presentation too from our audience members.
Good.
Um, oh, here's an interesting question thinking about the work that you've done over looking back at your long career. Do you have any recollections of how it felt to be shown in early commercial galleries, like the Karuba Gallery or by Zoe Desan in Seattle, who are promoting moderns from the Northwest and well beyond? And was there a coming of age for you or the community with any of this?
Oh, there certainly was. And, for many years, there were no galleries in Portland up until it would have been 1961. The Image Gallery and the Fountain Gallery. Arlene Schnitzer opened the Fountain Gallery, and Jack McClarty and his wife opened the Image Gallery, and those were the first two kind of serious full-time galleries in Portland ever. And before that, the artists had to show in restaurants and so on, or you get an old storefront and get a group of artists together and you'd show. And I had a show of my work in my house where before the galleries got going, where I hung paintings on all the walls and up the stairwell and in the bedrooms upstairs, and a lot of people came, and and there were sales and stuff. But and I had a great big painting that was 10 feet by something, and I screwed that onto the ceiling in the living room. So it was the only space I had. So you make do with what you have in order to show. But after the image in the fountain opened, then things really began to change. And it was also around the time that shortly after Louis Bunce had painted the mural at the airport, and there was much more talk about art in Portland suddenly than there ever had been, and things began gradually and pretty much then more quickly to there were other galleries opening and a lot more activity, and until boy at one time, this was now still 30, 40 years ago, but I counted all the galleries that were listed in the Oregonian, and there were something like 50 galleries. That they're probably somewhat fewer now, but and then there are younger people that are opening galleries here and there, and God bless them. That's fine. You know, they're the established galleries, but you don't have to really depend entirely on that. Now the COVID is causing other sort of problems because you know, people have had to just look at shows online pretty much and have gotten out of the habit of going. I hope that we'll get, once we get over this in the next few months or year or something, that will get back to some kind of normality, because gallery openings are a lot of fun, and it's a way of connecting with other artists and with potential buyers, and that you just don't get from the virtual world.
Yeah, that sense of community. I certainly really miss the in-person sense of community, getting to look at art with in person, but also to talk with others in person and that exchange. And it's a good moment too to remind people, you know, of course, how vital galleries and the community supporting artists and people making during this time are to us, and how important it is not to forget them, or not to, you know, there's ways you can support, you can still buy art during this time and still support galleries and attend online programs, and all of that
Mhm.
helps keep
One
that
of the
community
one of
going.
the things that I've often thought about that should be sort of obvious, but is that the general public, the artists provide a huge service for the general public, in that the gallery shows are all free, and one can live your whole life in Portland never buying a work of art. That's okay, but you go you and you can enjoy the galleries, and it's absolutely free, and you can watch the artists grow, and you can see you can get a huge amount out of it, and it's anyway, it's something to recognize. I think that in almost all the other arts, you've got to pay something for it. You know, you go to a concert, there's an admission, and uh, maybe poetry, you can buy the book, etc. But there is a service that the artists do for the community just by doing their work, and that's not necessarily compensated for. And as I say, I'm not whining about it. I don't think that I just want to bring it up as something that I think people can be grateful for.
Oh, absolutely. And that's very well said too. I realized too, as you were talking about Louis Bunce a lot throughout your talk and sharing images and the life masks, and you talked a little bit about who he was and why he was important to you, but can you just share a little bit more, especially if some attendees aren't familiar with Louis Bunce, or what his artwork was like? And
Yeah, well, he was largely an abstract artist, He sometimes did figures, and in the early years did landscapes. But his abstractions almost always had a sense of landscape to them, either landscape or still life or figure. You could see references uh, uh, to those qualities in his work. Um, he was also just tremendously talented guy, and he had spent a time in New York, uh, uh, as did Bill Givler, the dean of the school. But Louis was very gregarious, and he would get to know people very easily. And he, because of living in New York, he maintained a relationship with New York artists, and it made frequent trips there, which as students we all benefited from, because he was very much in tune with the latest movements. And I might just mention that, which a lot of people know, but some don't, that he was also friends with Jackson Pollock, good friends with him, and he was the one that introduced Lee Krasner to Pollock when she was quite a bit younger than he, and she was admiring his work and kind of shy, and he took her to Pollock's studio, which is kind of a nice thing to know. But he and then in later years, he and Manuel and I traveled with him back to New York, and and met a lot of these artists that we hadn't known before, that Louis still had contacts with, and that was a great trip. But Louis painted the mural out at the airport, and that became a seminal, pivotal thing in the whole art life of Portland, because it was such a scandal. And if you look at the newspapers from back at that time, people wanted to, I mean, his life was threatened. It was just amazing. Garbage was dumped on his front lawn, and there was and it was in the newspapers week after, week after week. I don't know, at least for 3 weeks, I think. It was front page news. What's Bunce doing now? And but as a result of that, people got they ordinary people that had never been to an art museum or a gallery were reading about it in the paper. It was interesting. It was scandalous. It was something that they should know about, and it became the point at which a lot of things began to change. I mean, I see it as a kind of fulcrum where things after that, just in terms of what people's awareness of art changed tremendously because of that airport mural. The mural is still there, and now, most people when they're traveling don't bother looking up. I mean, it was so outrageous at the time, and the people that were against it were saying, "Oh, it's bringing communism to our." Somehow or other, in those days, everything that was a little strange was communist. But and it's going to ruin our children. And how can we hold our heads up if we had something like that in our airport? Now, I mean, it's certainly a sign of how not only Portland, but the whole social setup has changed, and people's awareness of art, and particularly the visual arts has matured, I think.
And can I ask you one last question that someone submitted? What has been so far for you the most rich season or era of your life for making art? And what did you do to nourish and cultivate those favorite productive times?
Well, I think what I did to cultivate it is very simple. I just went to the studio all the time, and 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 I kept, you keep your eyes open. So I've been influenced by lots and lots of artists. I mentioned picking up on Magritte and Courbet and such, but there are just countless artists that I learned from. And sometimes I steal something that there were, some notion that they've originated. Now I can use it in some way. That's fair game. And but actually being in the studio and doing the work, as I say, art's a lot of fun, but it's also hard work. And you can, at the end of a good day working, you can be really tired. Uh, but there's satisfaction in it. You've gained something. I mean, I think I've learned. I mean, I can't imagine that I would know as much as I think I know about myself if I weren't an artist. So, and art has given me that a way into myself, and it has to do with making choices all the time. Some days I think, God, I've just been choosing, because you as you paint, you can get into a zone where you're not basically thinking, but most of the time I think I'm thinking, or at least I paint and then I sit down and look at it. Now I'm the critic now, and I'm making choices. Do I leave this or do I paint over it? And you're always in a sense destroying what you're doing. You're destroying a path that might go to the left or to the right because you want to go straight. Uh, for instance, I mean, you might want to go to the left, and then you destroy the right-hand path. Uh, but the thing about being productive is doing the work, and the work will pull you along. I mean, you tap into something. I think by working, you tap into something that's floating around out there that's very mysterious, and you catch a hold of it somehow, or it floats down to you, but only if you're there uh, working at it.
So true. Well, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. This was just an excellent program, and thank you for all your time answering our questions. And I do hope that for the 2022 McCosh Memorial Visiting Lecture Series on Northwest Art, I hope that program next year will be back in the museum and that everyone stays safe and healthy until then. And George, just thank you again so much. Thank you to our audience. Any final words before we sign off?
Well, thank you. Just thank you very much for having me. And uh, it's always both a little nerve-wracking, but also a great pleasure to be able to talk about my own stuff. I mean, boy, what a pleasure that is. So just thank you very much for the invitation. And uh, I had a good time.
Me too.
Thank you.
The pleasure was ours. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.